good afternoon or good evening. I'm not really sure which one it is. It's in between. My name is Robert Buxton. I'm going to play some classical piano and some gospel at the end, old-time gospel. And I'll talk about what I'm doing, maybe a little too much, but that's what I do. So I've been here before. Last time was probably several months ago, 6 months ago or so. And I'm still doing the same theme that I did last time, which is violin music, because I'm obsessed with the violin. Yet, to put it straightforward, I'm too lazy to learn it. So I'm sticking with the instrument I know. I had this during the pandemic when it started. I watched a documentary about Yehudi Menuhin, Nathan Milstein, Yasha Heifetz, all these great violinists, and I said to myself, I need to switch instruments, that's it. I caught the bug, but my wife, who's a pianist, also very wisely urged me not to, because we had our first kid at that time, our first son, who was like 2 months old. She said, you don't do it. It's not worth it. So stick to the piano. So plan B was to play violin music on the piano. But before that, I want to start with a very short thing I've been doing more of lately, which is improvisation. I love to improvise, noodle. And in classical music, that used to be the thing they did until more recently, last 50, 60, 70 years. So let's try it. I don't know what's going to happen, but I need your help. We need some random notes. Could you give me one, please? Just any note.
E flat.
Okay, E flat. I heard a few. I heard E flat. Okay. And then what else was it? There was a couple more there.
I don't know music.
Oh, that's okay. You have alphabet from A to G, and you can flat or sharp it. Pretty much that's it. We have an E flat. I need maybe a couple more notes, you know.
C sharp.
C sharp. Okay, maybe one or two more. I like that. E flat, C sharp. Two more. Maybe.
D flat.
D flat. Oh, we already have D flat. C sharp. Okay. One more.
G.
G. Okay. Oh, that's nice. Okay, that's very unusual. All right. Now, what are we going to do with it? I don't know. It sounds like it could be early 20th century. You know, Baird, Ravel, Debussy. I don't know. Any requests for style or mood or whatever? We can just. It's up to you. I'm improvising here. Or just see what happens. See what happens. Okay, let's see what happens. I don't know. I'm thinking a little bit, like I said, early 20th century, a little bit of impressionism. Very small improv, but it was just to get us into it, because now I'm going to play something quite long, very long. This is the meat and potatoes of today, this piece. I'm going to play, it's confusing a little bit, but I'm going to do the first movement of Beethoven's Violin Concerto. Now, how on earth, violin concertos for violin and orchestra, so what am I doing here? Beethoven arranged this piece himself for the piano. It's not done all that much, although the great Daniel Barenboim played it. So some people played it, but not many. So it's Beethoven's own arrangement for piano. And what I've done is added in some of the orchestra parts myself too. So let me tell you the history of this piece. Beethoven wrote his violin concerto in 1806. But the first performance was sort of not successful. And Franz Clement, who was the violinist who played it, he noticed that the audience didn't really get it. Because the piece is very, I don't want to say boring, it's not boring, but it's very meditative. It's not the usual Beethoven shaking his fist at fate, or however people describe it, but it's not that. It's much more, placid and serene. Let me just check if this thing's actually on. All right, good. Yeah. And I think that the audience, they didn't quite get it at the time. And the violinist, Franz Clement, noticed that. And after the first movement, which is, I mentioned, is quite long, it's like 25 minutes, just the first movement. And I'm only going to do the first movement today, I haven't learned the rest. He noticed it, and he turned his violin upside down and improvised a country fiddle tune to wake people up. Not country as in Appalachia, maybe Swiss Alps country, Austrian Alps, but close enough, it's the same thing really. But it was after Beethoven's death with Mendelssohn and Joachim, a great violinist, Hungarian violinist, that this piece became really established in the repertoire and accepted and loved moreover for what it truly is. And I think that what defines this piece in Beethoven's life is the fact he wrote it after he was coming to terms with that he knew he was going deaf. And at first he was really, not thrilled to say the least with it, but he reached this point around 1805, 1806 where he accepted it, very philosophically, And I think that's what this piece is about. And so that adds depth and layers to it. It's not just meditative and calm for no reason. There's a volcano under it, So that's what this piece I would say about it. Now, a couple things about Beethoven in general. First of all, another thing I forgot to mention that, so the first performance on violin did not go well. The audience didn't like it. Beethoven noticed this, and for that reason, he made the piano version. He thought, and his friend Clementi suggested him, why not readapt it or adapt it for the piano and see if it gets, if it's better that way. So that's what he did, but it turns out most of the time you hear it on violin, not very much on piano. So Leonard Bernstein, great Beethoven conductor, a great everything conductor, he said that Beethoven is interesting because if you isolate any melody from Beethoven, it's not great by itself. I mean, take for example, obviously that's iconic, but what is that really? It's just, that's it. It's just a rhythmic idea. It's almost primitive, but it's what he does with it, how he develops it, that's magic. That's Beethoven, according to Bernstein. I think it's really great. Or take the Appassionata Sonata, which starts out with just an arpeggio. That's not a tune. What is that? But it's what he does with it. Beethoven struggled with his compositions. We have his manuscripts, and he would cross things out, rewrite. There are, stains of cheap wine and even his teardrops on the manuscripts because he struggled and suffered with every note. Mozart, maybe not so much. It just came to him, he wrote it out. But Beethoven, and that's how he operated, and then the results are glorious. So that's how Bernstein puts it. And finally, I'll say this about Beethoven, that I had a professor who put it this way. He said, for him, Beethoven is Tolstoy in music. And what he meant by that was, he said, with Tolstoy and Beethoven, it's not just aesthetic, it's not just beautiful, it's more than that. It's the realm of ethics, it's the realm of humanity. Because Beethoven can instill or inspire this kind of compassion in us that goes to that deep part of humanity. Tolstoy, in his essay, What is Art, which incidentally he trashes Beethoven in that essay. These guys all hated each other, it's just, but he says that he's describing the backstage of an opera theater. And he says, what's the point of all this? Because you have real suffering in the world. Why have an opera? Why have all this production? And that's a great question. I think about this. Why this instrument when things, out in the world are can be really so dark? And Tolstoy concludes by saying, if one person walks away from that opera with a little more tenderness, a little more sensitivity in their heart, in their soul, then the opera has done its job. And I think Beethoven's like that. I really do. That's why his Ninth Symphony, for example, it's such a universal thing. It's not just beauty, it's more than that. It's humanity. So, anyway, in conclusion, I'm going to play this very long first movement. This is the Beethoven Violin Concerto in D major, but it's Beethoven's own piano version of it. And we'll see what happens. found it boring and fell asleep at the first performance. I think it's quite electrifying, that piece. So again, welcome. So that was Beethoven, the violin concerto, first movement, but arranged for piano by Beethoven. He arranged it himself. There's a thing about playing arrangements, which is what I'm doing now, because arrangements are like translations in literature. You don't have to learn ancient Greek to read Homer. I don't have to learn the violin, which is Greek to me, essentially. I don't have to learn violin to play violin music, because we have arrangements. There's some, including one of my absolute favorite pianists, and who was my teacher, was big friends with Sviatoslav Richter. And Richter did not really like arrangements. He said, why would you want to, it's kind of watered down, he said, if you play an arrangement. And there are people in the classical music world, they say, yeah, it's sort of, it lacks a sort of purity, because you're playing something that's for something else. But here's the thing about that argument that I find curious. That's, of course, Beethoven's own arrangement of the violin concerto. Beethoven would normally write a cadenza, or cadenzas, for his concertos. A cadenza is a space for improvisation, actually, in the piece. And usually, like Mozart didn't write a cadenza, you just improvise. And Beethoven was a great improviser, but he liked to write his own cadenzas for the piano concertos. He wrote out his own cadenzas. But here's the thing, for the violin concerto, there's no cadenza. Most violinists play Fritz Kreisler. He wrote this beautiful, beautiful cadenza. They play that, or someone like Nathan Milstein, who I love very much, violinist, he wrote his own. But here's the thing, Beethoven did write a cadenza for the piano version of that piece, of the concerto. And I played it, it's bonkers towards the end. Because what he does, and I was trying to imitate it, but I told you I played this for orchestra. I tried to play the orchestra parts too, as much as I could with 10 fingers. And weirdly, he uses timpani in the cadenza. Usually, cadenza is just for the instrument and nothing else, the soul of it. But here, that's why I was doing all this business down here, That's the timpani drums. So Beethoven writes this cadenza for the piano version. And some violinists take that piano cadenza and adapt it for violin and timpani. So it gets confusing, doesn't it? Because what's the purest version of the piece? Well, the original violin, but he didn't write a cadenza for that, so well, what do you do? But he did for the piano version. So anyway, I'm already confused myself. So let's do some short pieces. I'm gonna play, I promise these are short now. These are more in the salon music vein than the heavy classical vein. I'm gonna play a short piece by Ravel, French composer, early 20th century, and it's called Pièce en forme de habanera, which means piece in the style of a habanera, which is not only a spicy pepper, but it's a dance, which has a rhythm like this. And there's, of course, those are not the right notes, but Bizet's Carmen, there's a famous habanera. Because habanera is Cuban, originally from Havana, but it was very popular in France in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. So Bizet used it, Ravel, many others. So a little more about this. Ravel, usually we pair him with Debussy and call him an impressionist. Although Debussy and Ravel didn't love that word, but I think it's somewhat accurate. And like the impressionist painters, Debussy and Ravel, who were very much loved today, were not very much loved in their time. The composers like Saint-Saëns and Fauré in Paris at that time, who were wonderful, I loved their music, they hated this music. Fauré taught Ravel, and Ravel wrote him a string quartet, the famous F major, for his birthday. I think it was his birthday, it was a present, and Fauré wrote a letter to Ravel and said, clearly this string quartet is a total and utter miserable disaster. Very encouraging. You look at the reviews of Monet, they said this guy needs glasses. What's the matter with him? Of course, nowadays, everyone knows and loves Monet. It's just a sad fact about these things. So, and Ravel was very much, controversial at that time, because what he was doing, now we love those sounds, but, he was friends with Stravinsky. He's right on the cusp of modernism. He influenced jazz, as jazz also influenced him in turn. So Anyway, yeah, that's what I would say about Ravel. He was a strange guy. He was very enigmatic, a loner, lived with many cats, which I love cats, so he couldn't be such a bad person with all of his cats. Anyone who loves cats is good. So, okay, so this piece, the habanera I'm going to play, it's not a piano piece. It's for voice and piano. And you hear it on violin, you hear it on flute, but the version I'm going to play is done by, it's an arrangement by a guy named Daniel Aricourt. Does that name ring a bell for anyone? Because I live near Greensboro, and I have this unfortunate story. I failed to look up Daniel Aricourt, and I played in Greensboro, I played this piece. And a lady, I said, I don't know Daniel Aricourt. He was a French pianist and composer, that's all I know. I think he knew Ravel and Debussy, because it says 1924 or something on the music. So this lady comes up to me and says, you're not going to believe this, Robert, but Daniel and Jane Aricourt were my neighbors in Greensboro for 20 odd years. I said, what? The same, was he a musician? Oh yeah, they're both musicians. He taught at the UNCG. I couldn't believe it. I looked him up. And yeah, he comes from La Belle Époque, Paris, and came to America, ended up in Greensboro, taught at UNC Greensboro, and retired there. His wife's still around, and a wonderful musician herself. And here's the thing, I played it somewhere. And a lady came up to me and said, Jane was here 30 minutes ago, you just missed her. She's visiting her friends. I was at Wellspring Retirement Community. So I mean, it's just a small world, and the moral of the story is always look up who you're speaking about, because you never know. So this is Ravel, arranged by Aricourt, pièce en forme de habanera. I told you it was short. I have more short pieces. So I had a dream about Ravel's music once. It's somehow, to me, it helps me get the style. I was struggling with a big piece by Ravel when I was in college. And, well, I don't advertise this a lot, but I grew up in New Jersey. Yeah, my father's Southern, my dad's from Virginia. My mother's, well, very much the opposite. She's from Moscow, Russia, so it's a big mix. She came in 1980 from Russia, so more on that later when I play Southern Gospel. That's my dad's influence. He made sure that I knew I wasn't really from New Jersey, that's as he put it. But at any rate, so my dream, I was home for the holidays, for the winter break. And in my dream, I'm a bit of a night owl, so in my dream I was driving at night. It was late, and I was driving by, well, New Jersey's most famous landmarks, or malls, probably. Not to put, I love New Jersey, it's a great place, but in my dream I was driving by some mall. It was very late at night. All the chandelier lights were on, but there were no people. And it was Christmas time, it was very, peaceful. And I woke up and it clicked. I said, I heard Ravel's music in my head during that dream. That sparkly, glittery, some slightly magic. That's it. I got it. That's how it is for me. Now, the reason I don't share that all the time is I don't think Ravel had malls in New Jersey in mind when he wrote his music. But somehow that connection worked for me. So here's another French piece, but I'm not going in chronological order. This is 19th century. This is Jean-Gabriel Marie. Probably this is the style that Ravel was so much in contrast to and so different from. This piece is called La Cinquantaine, the 50th anniversary from the Golden Wedding. And it's a suite of pieces for cello and strings. It's almost like light classical, but it's a beautiful piece. It's simultaneously joyful and melancholy. That sounds cliche, but it's both at the same time. And there's a famous version of this done by the Woody Herman Big Band in the 40s. It's different from how I'm going to do it, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. This La Cinquantaine 50th anniversary by Jean-Gabriel Marie. Again, it's a violinists play this. That's why I'm doing, it's my violin act, so. that's like a salon piece, you could say. It's short, it has that, it's not deadly serious. And salon music is a bit overlooked nowadays, like salon painting. There was a wonderful violinist I got to know a bit, and I actually impersonated him pretty well. He's no longer around. It's Aaron Rosand, if that name. He was a brilliant violinist and taught at Curtis. I knew him at a summer festival. As a tangent here, I would impersonate him, and some of his students noticed it, and they thought it was funny, and they had me impersonate him for him in front of everyone. He was an older guy, smoked cigars all the time, and he had a very distinct talking voice. He called everyone Shenny. You see, hello, Shenny. So I did this impersonation for him. He hated shoulder rests. He said that he would say all the great violinists, Milstein, Heifetz, Rosand, none of them use a shoulder rest, you see. So I did this impersonation for him. Everyone was laughing except him. I was scared. And he had these big eyes, and I stopped, and I just didn't know what to do. And he looks at me and he says, "You're absolutely right. Shoulder rests are terrible." And so I don't know if he got the joke, but the point is that he had so much wit and insight, and I'm so glad I got to know him from the golden age of violinists. And he said all the time, he said, nowadays you go to a recital, you'll hear someone play 4 sonatas. He said, I'll fall asleep. 1 sonata is fine, but what about the short pieces? Nobody does those anymore. So I kind of took a little, from him. So the short pieces, they're a little bit like dessert maybe, but you need dessert. You can't just eat steak and potatoes all the time. So, okay, here is another shorter piece. How about Fritz Kreisler? This is an early Fritz Kreisler piece called Caprice Viennois, Viennese Caprice. And Kreisler is as Vienna as can be. I mean, he's just the epitome of Viennese culture. There's a word, Gemütlichkeit, which means coziness, contentment. An Austrian friend of mine said it's sitting by the fireplace, drinking hot chocolate, and it's snowing outside. That's Gemütlichkeit, and that's Kreisler. But Kreisler was Jewish, and when the Nazis came to power, he knew he had to get out. And it's just such a sick irony and a twist of history that this man who was so Vienna was ultimately rejected by that culture completely. And he was lucky. He came to America and had a wonderful time here. He made friends with Rachmaninoff. They played pranks on each other. That's for another time. But Kreisler ended up here, and he was a wonderful person, a very warm-hearted person. And so this is the Caprice Viennois by Fritz Kreisler. So again, it's for violin and piano, but this is a solo version. I think he did it himself, but I'm not sure. I haven't found it. Who wrote the arrangement? it's getting close to 5. That clock's a little fast. I have mine here. So I'm going to go a little over about 10 minutes. Carissa told me that dinner starts at 5. So as a big lover of food, if you need to go by 5, please don't hesitate. I don't want you to feel obliged, but I don't want to make anyone late for dinner or miss any special dishes because again, it's music's one thing, but food is where it's at. I really believe that. I'm a professional eater who plays the piano on the side. I'm going to play now another famous violin piece, of course. This is the Meditation from Thais by Massenet. And it's from the opera Thais, which is from 1891. I'll give you a little background on the story of that opera. It's a typical opera plot, you know. Opera plots are odd sometimes, but it takes place in Alexandria, Egypt, at the end of the Roman Empire. And Thais worships, she's a young woman who worships Venus and the other Greco-Roman gods and goddesses. And there's an early Christian monk who's given the task to convert her, and in the process falls in love with her. Because it's an opera. I mean, if you don't have that, it's not an opera. But it's not, I mean, there's a lot of interpretations of that opera. Some people say, oh, it's about love, you know, transcending religious convictions. But a lot of other people say, no, it's actually an opera about Christian love, actually. So there's that too. So I don't know. It could be both. It could be one or the other. This meditation is not sung. It's played on the violin. It's for violin and orchestra, and it occurs in the opera several times as an interlude. And it became so popular with violinists that they would just play it on recitals, and then, well, here I am just playing it on the piano because I don't play the violin. So here it is. This is the Massenet Meditation from Thais, piano version, of course. So, as I said, if you need, I know it's all out after 5. So one more classical piece, then I'm going to do some gospel, very short, and we'll end by 5:12 or 5:10 or something. So this is a piece by Paganini for violin. It's the 24th Caprice for solo violin, arranged by Franz Liszt for piano. And Paganini, I may have done, not this one, but I've done others of these here before in the past. So Paganini was this kind of wild man violinist in the early 1800s, late 1700s. He was very controversial. Some people thought he was possessed because he was just this wild man, even the way he looked, the way he played violin. It was frightening. He was very striking in what he did. He was like a rock star, you know. But the Romantics loved him for this, just like Beethoven. They loved Beethoven because Beethoven, you know, he stood out from that age of reason, the age of enlightenment. He was not that, and neither was Paganini. Especially Paganini was especially not that. So Liszt heard Paganini as a young man in Paris, and if you can believe it, he was quite miserable in his early years in Paris. Liszt, I mean, it's hard to be miserable in Paris, maybe, but you know, Liszt had some personal tragedies. He was really sort of stuck in his life, and he heard Paganini perform, and it just floored him. He locked himself in a room to practice for a few years, incessantly, while reading Dante, Shakespeare, Goethe, etc., to educate himself too. And he emerged after this period as the Liszt that we remember now. And the first thing he did then was to arrange Paganini's music for the piano. He wanted to translate the virtuosity that Paganini had on the violin to this instrument. So it's a famous theme and variations. Many composers like Rachmaninoff and others have used this. I'll play the opening for you. It's familiar. You know. Right, that's the 24th Caprice by Paganini. So, but anyway, see what Liszt does with this. A little different. couple short gospel pieces I'm going to play. First, softly and tenderly, because the last one was not so soft and tender, so let's change the mood a little bit. Do maybe one more. I'll ask you which one. I have two possibilities. One is a sort of country gospel version of "There Is a Fountain," or a Mahalia Jackson inspired version of "He's Got the Whole World in His Hands." Which one would you Mahalia. Okay, so I love Mahalia Jackson. She's one of maybe the greatest voice singer ever. But I want to tell you a quick story about playing her music, because she's the ideal musician for me. I mentioned the name Mahalia Jackson. I was playing somewhere, I won't say where, not around here, not anywhere nearby. And someone started laughing at the mention of the name Mahalia Jackson. I was upset because I think Mahalia Jackson is really, beyond music, she was friends with Martin Luther King and everything, sang at his funeral. But when I got to my car afterwards, it hit me. He thought I said Michael Jackson, probably. And it's very, very different. So just to be very clear, this is Mahalia Jackson, not me. That's what the style we're going for, so yeah. like, please sign. I have a guest book if you want to keep in touch. Thank you so much for coming, and would love to come back sometime soon. Yeah. Take care.